The crystal wine glass chimed against the silver fork, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the low hum of conversation. It was the sound of money. Not old money, quiet and assured, but new money, loud, desperate, and borrowed. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, swirling the ice in my water glass. The ice was melting, much like the patience I had been hoarding for the last 3 years. Attention, everyone. Attention, please. My mother, Beverly, stood up at the head of the table. She was wearing a sequin dress that cost more than my first car, her face flushed with the kind of pride that usually precedes a fall. Beside her sat my sister, Tiffany. At 38, Tiffany still had the expectant look of a child waiting to be handed a participation trophy, except her trophies were now houses, cars, and vacations she hadn't paid for. "I want to propose a toast," Mom announced, her eyes sweeping over the guests, neighbors, distant cousins, and a few of Tiffany's influencer friends who were live streaming the turkey. "To my daughter, Tiffany. Not only has she been a wonderful mother to my grandkids, but today we are celebrating her greatest achievement yet. She has officially closed on this beautiful, 5-bedroom home in the prestigious Lakeview community." Applause erupted. It was polite, dutiful. Tiffany beamed, tilting her head in that practiced way she used for selfies. "Oh, stop it, Mom," she giggled, clearly wanting her to continue. "It was hard work, but Mark and I made it happen." I looked at Mark, Tiffany's husband. He was staring into his mashed potatoes, as if he wished they would swallow him whole. He looked pale, sweaty, and terrified. He knew I was looking at him. He knew what was in the sleek, black leather portfolio resting against the leg of my chair. Mom wasn't done. She never was. She needed a villain to make her hero shine brighter. Her gaze drifted down the table and landed on me. The warmth in her eyes instantly evaporated, replaced by a pitying sneer masked as maternal concern. "And Juliana," she said, her voice dropping an octave, dripping with artificial sweetness. "We're so glad you could make it from the city. How is your little apartment?" The table went quiet. This was the ritual. The public shaming. "It's fine, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "It's efficient." "Efficient," Tiffany repeated, snorting into her champagne. "That's a nice word for shoebox, Jules. Honestly, I don't know how you live like that. Renting at 34. It's just sad. You're throwing money away." "Tiffany is right," Mom chimed in, nodding sagely. "You know, Juliana, when are you finally going to settle down? Look at your sister. She has the house, the family, the lifestyle. You work all those long hours at that computer job, and for what? You have nothing to show for it. No husband, no property, no legacy." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity of it. The hubris. They had no idea. They saw my Toyota Camry outside and assumed struggle. They saw my off-the-rack blazer and assumed mediocrity. They didn't see the woman who had just negotiated a merger for a tech giant 2 weeks ago. They didn't see the bank accounts I managed. "I'm saving, Mom," I lied smoothly. It was the lie I had told them for years to keep their hands out of my pockets. "Saving," Beverly scoffed. "You've been saving since you were 16. You're just cheap, Juliana. That's the truth. You don't know how to enjoy life. You're terrified of spending a dime because you don't have the courage to invest in yourself." She gestured grandly around the room. "Look at this house. This is what courage looks like. This is success." Tiffany took a risk and looked at the reward. I looked around the room. I saw the cheap molding disguised with fresh paint. I saw the staging furniture that likely had to be returned next week. And beyond the French doors, through the darkness of the winter night, I knew what lay across the fence. The Lakeview estate. The massive, historic property that loomed over this cookie-cutter subdivision like a castle over a village. "It is a nice house, Tiffany," I said, taking a sip of my water. "Enjoy it while you can. Tiffany narrowed her eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Just that homeownership is a big responsibility, I said, allowing a small, cryptic smile to touch my lips. Mortgages, property taxes, maintenance. It adds up. Especially when you don't actually have an income. I am a content creator. Tiffany snapped. And I am a CFO, I thought, but didn't say it. Not yet. Don't be jealous, Juliana, Mom warned, pointing a manicured finger at me. It's Christmas. Don't ruin it with your bitterness just because your sister is winning and you're you. I gripped the napkin in my lap. Bitterness. No. This wasn't bitterness. This was calculation. I was the one who had bailed them out of credit card debt 3 times. I was the one who paid for Dad's funeral when Mom claimed she was illiquid. I was the one who had been the safety net until the net snapped. But tonight the net wasn't just broken. It was being woven into a noose. I'm not jealous, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. I'm just observant. Speaking of settling down, I actually have some news. The room paused. Mom looked annoyed that the spotlight was shifting. Did you get a cat? Tiffany drawled. No, I said. I reached down and touched the leather portfolio. I made an investment. A big one. Oh, did you finally buy a condo? Mom asked condescendingly. Maybe we can help you with the down payment. Oh wait, no, Tiffany needed that for the closing costs here. Sorry, dear. That was the trigger. That casual admission that my mother had drained her resources I knew she didn't really have, to fund this charade. I looked at Mark again. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He looked like a man on the way to the gallows who had decided to turn state's evidence. Actually, I said, standing up. I don't need a down payment. I pay cash. Cash. Tiffany laughed, a shrill, nervous sound. From where? Your coupon clipping. From my salary, Tiffany. And my investments. I walked over to the fireplace, commanding the room not with volume but with presence. But before I share my news, I want to thank everyone for being here. It's important to have witnesses. I paused, looking directly into the camera lens of Tiffany's friend who was still live streaming. Witnesses for what? Mom asked, her glass halting halfway to her mouth. For the truth, I said. Because tonight isn't about celebration, Mother. It's about an audit. I threw the portfolio onto the table. It slid across the mahogany surface and stopped right in front of the turkey. Shall we open it? I asked. But before I opened that folder, before I unleashed the storm, I had to remember how I got here. I had to remember the little girl who just wanted to be seen. To understand why I brought foreclosure papers to a Christmas dinner, you have to understand the architecture of my family. It was built on a foundation of golden idols and scapegoats. We grew up in a suburb of Chicago that was just on the edge of being affluent. My parents, Beverly and Robert, were obsessed with appearances. Dad was a structural engineer, a quiet man who worked 80 hours a week to fund Mom's delusions of grandeur. He was present in body, but his spirit had checked out years ago, beaten down by Mom's relentless demands for more. Then there was Tiffany. My older sister by 4 years. From the moment she was born, Tiffany was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets destined to orbit her, hoping for a little warmth. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde curls, blue eyes, the kind of child who could smile and get away with murder. I was different. Dark hair, serious eyes, quiet. I liked books, Tiffany liked mirrors. The injustice started small. It always does. It was the little things. When Tiffany got AC on her report card, Mom would storm into the school and berate the teacher for not understanding Tiffany's creative genius. When I brought home straight A's, Mom would glance at the paper and say, "Well, you don't have a social life, Juliana." What else do you have to do but study? I remember my 10th birthday. I had asked for a telescope. I wanted to see the stars. I wanted to look at something bigger than our suffocating house. Instead, I got a hand-me-down sweater from Tiffany and a lecture. Money is tight right now, honey, Mom had sighed, pressing a hand to her forehead as if my existence was a migraine. We have to pay for Tiffany's dance competition fees. The costumes alone are a fortune. You understand, don't you? You're the smart one. You're the reasonable one. The reasonable one. That was my label. It meant the one who doesn't need anything. It meant the one who sacrifices. But the memory that seared itself into my soul, the one that turned my blood into ice water, happened when I was 16. I had been working since I was 14. Babysitting, walking dogs, tutoring math. I saved every penny. I had an old coffee tin hidden in the back of my closet, taped shut. I called it my freedom fund. It had nearly $2,000 in it. It was my ticket to a car, to independence, to a life where I didn't have to beg. One afternoon, I came home from school to find the house quiet. Too quiet. I walked into my room and felt a shift in the air. My closet door was slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fell to my knees and shoved aside the old sneakers. The tin was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my throat. I ran downstairs. Mom was in the kitchen, humming to herself, flipping through a catalog. Mom? Where is my tin? I gasped. The coffee tin from my closet. She didn't even look up. Oh, that. I needed to borrow it, sweetie. Borrow it. I screamed, my voice cracking. That was my money. I worked for 2 years for that. Where is it? Lower your voice, Juliana. You sound hysterical. She finally looked at me, her expression bored. Tiffany got into a little fender bender. Her insurance deductible is high, and she needed the car fixed for prom. You know how important prom is. It's a once-in-a-lifetime memory. She wrecked her car. I stared at her, tears blurring my vision. And you took my money? Did you ask me? I didn't have time to argue with you, Mom snapped, slamming the catalog shut. We are a family. We help each other. Besides, what did you need that money for? Books? You can walk to the library. Tiffany needs her car. I hate you, I whispered. It was the first time I had ever said it. Mom stood up and slapped me. It wasn't hard, but it was shocking. Don't you ever be so selfish again. You should be happy to help your sister. God, Juliana, why are you so greedy? Greedy. I walked out of the kitchen that day, and something inside me broke. But it wasn't a break that left me weak. It was a break that let the light in. The harsh, blinding light of reality. I realized then that nobody was coming to save me. My father was too passive. My mother was a narcissist. My sister was a parasite. If I wanted to survive, I had to stop being their daughter. I had to become their creditor. I stopped saving cash in the house. I opened a bank account they didn't know about. I studied harder. I got a full scholarship to the state university, so they couldn't hold tuition over my head. I moved out the day I turned 18, and never asked them for a dime. But I made a mistake. A fatal, emotional mistake. I kept hoping that if I became successful enough, if I became stable enough, they would finally respect me. I thought money and success would buy their love. I didn't know then that you can't buy what isn't for sale. And I didn't know that my success wouldn't make them love me, it would only make them hungrier. They viewed my salary not as my achievement but as their resource. I was the backup plan. The retirement fund. The emergency contact. Until the day I almost died, and they showed me exactly what my life was worth to them. 3 years ago. That was when the final thread was severed. I was 31, working as a senior financial analyst. I was exhausted, overworked, and desperate for approval. I had just bought my parents a cruise for their anniversary, a $4,000 bribe for affection. I was driving home late from the office in a rainstorm. A truck ran a red light. The sound of metal crunching, the shattering of glass, the world spinning violently into darkness. I woke up in the ICU. My leg was shattered. My ribs were broken. My spleen had ruptured. I was hooked up to machines that beeped in rhythm with my terrifyingly slow heart rate. I was alone. The nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, came in when she saw me stirring. "Where is my family?" I croaked, my throat feeling like it was filled with broken glass. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "We called the contact in your phone." "Mom?" She said she would get here when she could. When she could. I tried to sit up but agony pinned me down. "How long have I been here?" 2 days, honey. 2 days. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. The screen was cracked but it worked. I saw a text from Mom. "Juliana, hearing you're okay. Thank God. Listen, we're at the airport. Tiffany's bachelorette trip to Cabo is this week, and everything is non-refundable. You know how she gets if things don't go to plan. We'll come see you when we get back next Tuesday. Rest up. Dad says hi." I stared at the screen. The words blurred, swimming in front of my eyes. She was at the airport. I was in the ICU, possibly dying, and she was boarding a flight to drink margaritas because Tiffany couldn't handle a change in plans. Everything is non-refundable. Except me. I was refundable. I was disposable. I laid my head back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling tiles. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 100. I didn't cry. The tears simply didn't come. Instead, a coldness spread through my chest. It wasn't the cold of death, it was the cold of absolute clarity. It was the feeling of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. I realized I had spent my entire life investing in a failing enterprise, the family. I had poured in love, money, time, and loyalty, and the return on investment, ROI, was negative. It was a Ponzi scheme, and I was the last investor in. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "Okay." That was the snap. The Juliana who wanted Mommy's approval died in that hospital bed. The Juliana who bought anniversary cruises and bailed Tiffany out of credit card debt flatlined. In her place, the CFO rose up. I spent the next week in the hospital alone. I didn't call them. When they texted pictures of their margaritas, I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled up my financial apps. I looked at every transaction I had made for them over the last decade. The loans for Dad's car repairs. The gifts for Tiffany's weddings, plural. The rent assistance. I calculated the total. It was over 6 figures. Never again, I vowed. When they returned from Cabo, tanned and hungover, Mom finally visited. She breezed into the rehab center with a cheap bouquet of carnations. "Oh, look at you," she exclaimed, not noticing the cast on my leg or the bruises on my face. "You look fine. You had us so worried. But you're strong, Juliana. You're like a cockroach, you survive everything." "A cockroach?" "Mom," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I need you to leave." "What?" She blinked. "I just got here. I brought flowers. I'm tired. I have work to do." "Leave." She huffed, offended. "Fine. Be that way. We try to be supportive and you push us away. This is why you're alone, Juliana." She left. From that day forward, I initiated Operation Grey Rock. I became boring. I became vague. I stopped sharing details about my life. How's work? Mom would ask, sniffing for money. Fine. Boring. Pay cuts are rumored, I'd lie. Are you dating anyone? Too busy. Just trying to pay off these medical bills, I'd lie again. I made myself look small. I made myself look struggling. I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city that was safe but decidedly unglamorous. I drove my old Camry until the wheels threatened to fall off. I wore clothes from Target when I visited them. They loved it. See, a narcissist loves a victim. They loved feeling superior to me. Mom would slip me a $20 bill at holidays with a pitying look, telling me to buy something nice. I took it. I put it in the bank. Because while I was playing the role of the struggling spinster, I was building an empire in the shadows. 6 months after the accident, I was headhunted. A mid-sized tech firm needed a ruthless CFO to restructure their debt and prepare for an IPO. I took the job. My base salary tripled. My stock options were substantial. I didn't tell a soul. I worked 18-hour days. I invested aggressively. I bought rundown properties, renovated them, and flipped them. I played the stock market with the precision of a surgeon. While Tiffany was posting filtered photos of her rich mom life funded by mom's credit cards, I was accumulating real wealth. Quiet wealth. And then, I saw the listing. The Lakeview estate. The massive property right next to the subdivision where Tiffany had been bragging she was going to buy a house. It was a foreclosure. A historic mansion that needed work but had bones of steel. It was listed for $2.5 million. I had the liquid cash. I bought it under an LLC named Nemesis Holdings. The irony was delicious. I closed on the house 3 months ago. I hired a team to restore it secretly. I knew Tiffany was closing on the McMansion next door, a tacky, new construction box that cost way too much. I watched from afar. I waited. I knew the storm was coming. I just needed to verify the final piece of the puzzle. Where was the money coming from? Tiffany hadn't worked a day in her life, and her husband Mark was a mid-level manager at a paper company. The math didn't add up. And as a CFO, I hate it when the math doesn't add up. Living a double life is exhausting, but it's also intoxicating. By day, I was Juliana the powerhouse. I wore tailored Italian suits, commanded boardrooms, and made decisions that shifted millions of dollars. My colleagues respected me. They feared me a little, which is exactly how I liked it. I was known as the scalpel, precise, sharp, and capable of cutting out the rot without flinching. By night, or rather, whenever I had to interact with my family, I put on the costume of Juliana the failure. I'd switch my designer handbag for a worn-out canvas tote. I'd mention rent hikes and inflation with a heavy sigh. Oh, poor Juliana, Aunt Donna would say at family gatherings, patting my hand. Maybe you should ask Tiffany for advice. She's doing so well with her online thing. I will, I'd say, lowering my head submissively. She's so inspiring. Inside, I was screaming with laughter. My apartment was my stage set. It was clean but sparse. I kept the fridge mostly empty. I had a small TV. When Mom visited, which was rare, because my apartment didn't have the luxury she felt entitled to, she would look around with disdain. It smells like old soup in here, she'd wrinkle her nose. It's the neighbors, I'd say. Thin walls. The truth. I spent most of my weekends at the Lakeview estate. It was magnificent. High ceilings, marble fireplaces, a library that smelled of cedar and old paper. It sat on 5 acres of land that bordered the lake. From my master bedroom balcony, I could look down into the backyard of the house Tiffany was buying. I saw the sold sign go up on Tiffany's lawn. I saw her filming TikToks in the front yard, spinning around and pointing at the house like she had built it with her own two hands. I did my research. I pulled the property records for Tiffany's house. Owner, Tiffany and Mark Wilson. Mortgage lender, high-risk subprime corporation. Wait. Subprime? With interest rates this high? Why would they go with a predatory lender if Mom was helping them? And then I saw the down payment amount. $200,000. Where did Tiffany get $200,000? Mom had always complained about being house rich and cash poor. Dad's life insurance policy was decent, but Mom had burned through most of it on renovations and vacations in the 5 years since he passed. I started digging. I accessed public records. I hired a private investigator to look into Mom's assets. What I found was alarming. Mom had sold her jewelry. She had taken a second mortgage on her own house, the house I grew up in. But that still wasn't enough to cover the lifestyle she was funding for Tiffany. I sat in the library of my mansion, surrounded by spreadsheets. The silence of the house was heavy. I felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but I strangled it quickly. They are adults, I told myself. They made their choices. But the CFO in me knew that financial stupidity rarely stays contained. It spreads like a contagion. If Mom went bankrupt, who would she call? Me. The reasonable one. The saver. I needed to know the full extent of the damage. I needed a mole on the inside. And that's when my phone rang. It was Mark. Tiffany's husband. I hadn't spoken to Mark one-on-one in years. He was a spineless man, dragged along in Tiffany's wake, but he wasn't evil. Just weak. Juliana. His voice was a whisper. Can I meet you? Somewhere private. Don't tell Tiffany. What's wrong, Mark? Everything, he choked out. It's all a lie, Jules. The house, the money, it's all a lie. And I think I'm going to go to jail if I don't stop it. My grip tightened on the phone. Meet me at the Starbucks on 4th and Main. 30 minutes. Wear a hat. I drove my Camry to the meeting. Mark was sitting in the corner, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He was shaking. Mark, I said, sitting down and sliding a black coffee toward him. Talk to me. Start with the house. He looked around nervously, then leaned in. Tiffany didn't qualify for the mortgage. Her credit is shot. Mine is mediocre. We needed a cosigner, but Mom's credit is maxed out too. Southwest, how did you close? Mom did something crazy, Mark whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. She cashed it out, Juliana. All of it. Cashed what out? The retirement fund. Dad's 401k. The rollover IRA. Everything. The air left my lungs. Dad had worked 40 years for that money. He had skimped, saved, and denied himself everything so that Mom would be secure in her old age. It was nearly $700,000. She cashed it out. I hissed. The penalties alone, the taxes. She didn't care. Mark sobbed quietly. Tiffany told her she needed the seed money to buy the house, and that she'd pay Mom back once her influencer career took off. She promised Mom she could live in the guest suite. Mom liquidated the account. She paid the penalty. She gave Tiffany the cash for the down payment and the rest. Where is the rest, Mark? Gone, he said flatly. Tiffany spent it. Furniture. Clothes. The lease on the Range Rover. The launch party. $700,000. It goes fast when you're buying Hermes blankets and flying first class, Mark said bitterly. But that's not the worst part. There's worse. The mortgage application, Mark said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Look at it. I opened the envelope. My eyes scanned the documents. Income statements. Bank verifications. My blood ran cold. This says Tiffany is an employee of Juliana Consulting Group. I looked up at him. I don't have a consulting group named that. And this salary, $150,000 a year. Tiffany forged it, Mark admitted, burying his face in his hands. She used your name. She said since you're a big-shot CFO now, lenders would believe it. She created fake pay stubs. She forged your signature as the employer. I sat back. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't just financial stupidity. This was fraud. Bank fraud. Identity theft. And my mother knew. Does Mom know? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. She thinks it's creative accounting, Mark said. She said you wouldn't mind helping your sister out, even if you didn't know about it. She said you owed them. I owed them. I owed them my name. My reputation. My credit. I looked at Mark. Why are you telling me this? Because the bank called yesterday to verify employment, Mark said, trembling. They left a voicemail on Tiffany's burner phone. But if they dig deeper, if they call the IRS. Juliana, I have kids. I can't go to prison. I reached across the table and took the envelope. I held the evidence in my hands. It was heavy. You won't go to prison, Mark, I said softly. Not if you do exactly what I say. Anything. I need access to Mom's bank statements. I need the emails between Tiffany and the mortgage broker. I need everything. Can you get it? Yes, he said. Good. I stood up. Go home. Act normal. And Mark? Yeah. Don't sign anything else. I walked out of that coffee shop. The sun was shining, but all I could see was red. They had stolen my father's legacy. They had stolen my identity. And they planned to celebrate it at a Christmas party. Okay, I thought, unlocking my car. You want me to be the employer? Then I'll be the boss. And it's time for a performance review. The days leading up to Christmas were a blur of forensic accounting. Mark, terrified but compliant, forwarded me everything. It was a digital trail of tears. I sat in my office at the Lakeview estate, my real office, with the mahogany desk and the view of the frozen lake, and pieced together the autopsy of my mother's financial life. It was worse than I thought. Beverly hadn't just drained the retirement fund. She had stopped paying property taxes on her own home 2 years ago. There was a lien on the house. She was months away from foreclosure. And Tiffany? The golden child. Her bank statements were a study in pathology. $500 for a hair appointment. $300 for sushi. $1,200 for a handbag. All while her checking account hovered in the negative, sustained only by transfers from Mom. But the piece de resistance was the mortgage fraud. I held the document where Tiffany had forged my signature. It was a good forgery. She had practiced. She had taken my birthday card from last year, the one where I wrote "Love, Juliana," and traced it. Using my name to commit a felony. If the bank found out, and if I couldn't prove I wasn't involved, my career as a CFO would be over. I could be disbarred from financial practice. I could face investigation. They were willing to burn my life to the ground to keep Tiffany warm. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain anymore. It was power. For years, I had felt helpless. I had felt like the victim. But looking at these papers, I realized I was holding the nuclear codes. I called my lawyer, Sarah. Sarah was a shark in a Chanel suit, the best asset protection attorney in Chicago. Sarah, I said. I have a situation. Identity theft. Mortgage fraud. Family involved. How much damage? Sarah asked, her voice clipping along. Significant. But I don't want to go to the police yet. I want to secure the assets first. What assets? The house next door to me. And my mother's house. You want to buy the bad debt? I want to buy the notes I corrected. I want to become the bank. It took some doing. It took money, a lot of it. But Nemesis Holdings was liquid. I approached the bank holding the lien on my mother's house. They were happy to sell the distressed note to a private investor for pennies on the dollar to get it off their books. Then, I looked at Tiffany's lender. High-risk subprime corporation. They were harder to deal with, but everyone has a price. I couldn't buy her mortgage yet, it was too new. But I could flag it. I could prepare the dossier for the fraud department. But I decided to wait. Why? Because of the text message I received 3 days before Christmas. It was from Mom. Juliana, honey. So excited for Christmas at Tiffany's new house. Listen, we have a small hiccup. The caterer is demanding payment up front, and Tiffany is waiting for a brand deal check to clear. Can you spot us $10,000? It's just for a few days. We want everything to be perfect. You know how judgmental the neighbors are. Please don't be difficult. Love, Mom, $10,000. Not a request. A demand. Don't be difficult. I looked at the message. Then I looked at the dossier on my desk. If I sent the money, nothing would change. They would take it, spend it, and mock me. If I refused, they would uninvite me. And I needed to be at that party. I needed to be there when the clock struck midnight. I typed back. Sure, Mom. I'll bring a check to the party. See you there. I wasn't bringing a check. I printed out the evidence. The forged pay stubs. The bank transfers. The lien on Mom's house. The deed to my own house. I bound them in a sleek, black leather portfolio. I stood up and walked to the window. Down below, in the yard next door, I saw Tiffany directing a team of movers. She was shouting at them. She looked stressed. She didn't look up. She never looked up. If she had, she would have seen her sister, the failure, standing on the balcony of the castle, looking down at the peasant. Enjoy the view, Tiffany, I whispered. It's the last time you'll see it. The morning of the party, the group chat was exploding. Tiffany, everyone wear gold and white. It's a winter wonderland theme. No jeans. Mom, Juliana, make sure you dress appropriately. Don't embarrass your sister with those drab office clothes. Aunt Donna, can't wait to see the mansion. So proud of you, Tiff. I put my phone on silent. I spent the morning at the spa. I got a facial. I got a blowout. I put on a tailored cream pantsuit that cost more than Tiffany's car payments. It was white and gold, technically. But it screamed CEO, not trophy wife. Mark texted me one last time. Mark, I'm scared. Mom is already drinking. Tiffany is manic. She thinks you're bringing the check. Me, hold tight, Mark. Just open the door when I knock. I drove my Camry to the party. I could have taken my Porsche, yes, I have one, parked in the garage of the Lakeview estate, but I needed to maintain the illusion for one more hour. I parked down the street. As I walked toward Tiffany's house, I looked up at the house next door, my house. It was dark. I had set the timers so the lights would stay off until later. Tiffany's house was ablaze with lights. An inflatable Santa was half deflated on the lawn. A rented chocolate fountain truck was parked in the driveway. It smelled of desperation. I walked up the steps. I could hear the music inside. Michael Bublé singing about having a merry little Christmas. I took a deep breath. I touched the portfolio under my arm. It felt hot, like it was radioactive. This was it. The point of no return. I wasn't just walking into a party. I was walking into a demolition site, and I was the one holding the detonator. I rang the doorbell. Tiffany opened it. She was wearing a gold gown that was too tight and too sparkly. She held a glass of wine in one hand. Finally, she snapped, pulling me inside. "You're late. Did you bring it?" She didn't mean a gift. She meant the money. "Merry Christmas to you too, Tiffany," I said, stepping past her. "You have a lovely home. It's incredible, isn't it?" She flipped her hair. "Imported marble. Custom cabinets. But seriously, Jules, give me the check. The caterer is giving me the evil eye." "I gave it to Mom," I lied. "She put it in her purse." "Oh, okay." Tiffany relaxed instantly. The shark had fed. "Go get a drink. Try not to bore anyone." I walked into the living room. It was crowded. I saw neighbors I grew up with. I saw old high school frenemies. Mom spotted me and rushed over. She looked frantic beneath her makeup. "Juliana. Thank God. Did you give it to Tiffany?" "I gave it to you, remember?" I said, looking confused. "In the hall." "What? No, you didn't." "Mom, are you okay? You seem forgetful." "We talked about this. Gaslighting. It's a terrible weapon, but I had learned from the master." Mom looked confused, then terrified. I must have misplaced it. Oh God." She started frantically searching her clutch. "Relax, Mom," I said, patting her arm. "I have a backup. It's in the portfolio. We can sort it out after dinner. Let's enjoy the toast." Mom sagged with relief. "Okay. Good. Good girl. Just stay out of the way until then." I moved through the crowd. I found Aunt Martha, my dad's sister. She was the only one in the family who had ever sent me a birthday card with a $50 bill in it. "Juliana," she whispered, pulling me into a corner. "This whole thing, it feels wrong. How did she afford this?" "She didn't," I whispered back. Martha looked at me sharply. She saw the glint in my eye. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to balance the books, Aunt Martha." She looked at the portfolio. Then she looked at me. A slow smile spread across her face. "Give 'em hell, kid." The dinner was an exercise in nausea. The food was cold. The wine was cheap, poured into expensive decanters to hide the labels. I sat there, listening to the conversation. "So, Tiffany," a neighbor asked. "What does your husband do again?" "Mark is in investments," Tiffany lied smoothly. "Mark choked on his water. And I manage our portfolio. Real estate is really the only way to build wealth these days. Stocks are so volatile." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "And Juliana?" The neighbor turned to me. "Still at that computer firm?" "Yes," I said. "Just crunching numbers." "That must be steady," the neighbor said politely. "It is," I said. "Cash flow is very important." "Boring," Tiffany yelled from the head of the table. "Let's talk about the renovations. I'm thinking of tearing out the kitchen island. It's granite, but I really want quartz. And we're going to put a pool in the back. An infinity pool, looking over the lake." "That sounds expensive," Aunt Martha said. "Money is no object when you're building your forever home," Mom declared, beaming at Tiffany. "Besides, Tiffany deserves the best. She has such taste." "Speaking of the lake," Tiffany said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Have you seen the monstrosity next door? The old manor? My ears perked up. It's huge, a friend said. It's creepy, Tiffany shuddered. Someone bought it a few months ago. Probably some foreign investor or a drug dealer. They never turn the lights on. I bet it's full of rats. I'm going to petition the HOA to make them clean up the landscaping. It brings down our property value. Actually, I said, speaking up for the first time in 20 minutes. I think the landscaping is quite classic. English garden style. What do you know about style, Juliana? Tiffany sneered. You live in a rental box. You probably have a window unit AC. I'm just saying, I swirled my wine. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Or a house by its lights. Whatever, Tiffany rolled her eyes. Mom, tell them about the furniture we ordered from Italy. Mom launched into a monologue about leather grades. I checked my watch. 8 p.m. My phone vibrated. It was the security app for the Lakeview estate. Scheduled task, exterior lighting on. I smiled. Is it hot in here? I asked. Maybe we should open the curtains. The view of the snow on the lake must be pretty. Good idea, Mark said, jumping up. He knew the signal. Mark walked over to the massive French doors that faced the backyard. He pulled the velvet curtains back. A collective gasp went through the room. The house next door, the creepy manor, had just come alive. Floodlights illuminated the limestone facade. The massive windows were glowing with warm, golden light. The landscape lighting highlighted the manicured hedges and the majestic oak trees. It looked like Versailles in the middle of Illinois. It was breathtaking. It completely dwarfed Tiffany's vinyl-sided house. Whoa, the neighbor said. I thought you said it was abandoned, Tiff. Tiffany stood up, looking confused. It was. Who turned the lights on? Maybe the drug dealer is home, Aunt Martha chuckled. I don't like it, Mom said, frowning. It's too bright. It's shining right into our dining room. It's rude. I'm going to go over there and give them a piece of my mind. I wouldn't do that, Mom, I said, remaining seated. Why not? Mom snapped. I am the mother of the homeowner here. I have rights. Because, I said, reaching down and picking up the black portfolio. The owner is already here. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop on the fake hardwood floor. What are you talking about? Tiffany asked, her voice trembling slightly. I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my cream suit. I'm saying, I walked toward the window, standing framed against the glowing backdrop of my mansion. That I don't rent, Tiffany. And I don't need a down payment. I looked at Mom. I bought the estate next door. Cash. 3 months ago. Mom laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. You? Don't be ridiculous. That place it's millions. You make what? An hourly wage. I am the CFO of TechStream Solutions, I said, dropping the bomb. My base salary is $400,000. My annual bonus is larger than the mortgage on this house. And my stock portfolio. I paused for effect. Let's just say I could buy this neighborhood if I wanted to. Tiffany's face went white. Mom's mouth opened but no sound came out. But I didn't just buy the house next door, I continued, my voice hardening. I also bought something else. I opened the portfolio. I bought the truth. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of everyone's lungs. Tiffany was the first to try to regain control. You're lying, she spat, though her eyes were darting around the room, gauging the guests' reactions. You're making this up to humiliate me. You're just jealous. Get out of my house. It's not your house, Tiffany, I said calmly. I pulled out the first document. I held it up. It was a copy of the deed to her house. Technically, the bank owns it. High-risk subprime lenders, to be exact. Interest rate 9.5%. Adjustable in 2 years. Ouch. I tossed the paper onto the table. It landed on the stuffing. But that's not the interesting part, I continued, pacing slowly around the table like a shark circling a life raft. The interesting part is how you got the loan. I pulled out the forged employment letter. Mark told me everything. Tiffany's head snapped toward her husband. Mark. You traitor. Mark shrank into his chair. I couldn't do it anymore, Tiff. I can't go to jail. Jail? Mom whispered, clutching her pearls. What are you talking about? Forgery, Mom, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Bank fraud. Identity theft. Tiffany used my name, my credentials, and a forged signature to convince the bank she worked for me. She claimed I paid her $150,000 a year. The guests gasped. Phones were out. The live stream was definitely still running. I never employs thieves, I said. So that document is a felony. It was just a misunderstanding. Mom shrieked, standing up to defend her cub. She needed the house. You have so much, Juliana, why do you care if she used your name? You weren't using it. You weren't using it. The logic of a narcissist. I care because it's a crime, Mother, I said. But let's talk about your crime. I pulled out the next document. The bank statement. You cashed out Dad's 401k. $700,000. Gone. The neighbors looked at Beverly with horror. In this demographic, touching the retirement fund is the ultimate sin. It's my money. Mom yelled, her face turning blotchy red. I can do what I want with it. You could, I agreed. But you didn't just spend your money. You spent your future. And then I pulled out the foreclosure notice for Mom's house. You stopped paying your own mortgage. There is a lien on your home, Mom. The bank is initiating foreclosure next month. No, Mom staggered back. I was going to catch up. Once Tiffany's career took off. Tiffany's career is a myth. I slammed my hand on the table, making the plates jump. There is no career. There is only debt. And now you are broke. You have no retirement. You have no equity. You have nothing. Beverly looked at Tiffany. Tell her she's wrong. Tell her we have the money left over from the down payment. Tiffany looked down. I spent it, Mom. The furniture. The trip. The car. You spent all of it. Mom whispered. The reserve fund. The money for my guest suite. I had to maintain the image. Tiffany cried. For the brand. And here is the final nail, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I pulled out a thick legal document. Since Mom's house is in foreclosure, the bank put the note up for sale. Distressed debt. High risk. I smiled. A shark's smile. I bought it. What? Mom blinked. I bought your mortgage, Mom. I own the debt. Which means I own the foreclosure rights. I pointed to the window, to the glowing mansion next door. I live in a castle. You live on borrowed time. And effective immediately, I am calling in the loan. You're evicting me. Mom gasped. I'm your mother. And I'm the daughter you stole from when she was 16, I said cold as ice. I'm the daughter you left in the ICU to go drink margaritas. I'm the daughter whose name you let your golden child forge. I looked at Tiffany. And as for you, Tiffany, I haven't called the FBI yet regarding the fraud. Yet. Tiffany started to sob. Please, Jules. Please. They'll take my kids. Then you better start packing, I said. Because this house. Without Mom's money to pay the monthly payments, you'll default in 60 days. And I'll be right next door, watching. I picked up my portfolio. I looked around the silent room. The food was cold. The illusion was shattered. Merry Christmas, I said. I turned and walked out the front door. I walked down the driveway, the cold winter air biting my cheeks. But I didn't feel cold. I felt fire. I walked past my Camry. I kept walking. I walked to the ornate iron gates of the house next door. I punched in the code. The gate swung open. I walked up the long, heated driveway of my estate. I climbed the stone steps. I turned around at the top and looked down at Tiffany's house. I could see the chaos through the window. Mom was screaming. Tiffany was crying. Mark was holding his head. I took a deep breath. I entered my home and closed the heavy oak door, shutting out their noise, shutting out their drama, shutting out their needs. I was finally home. And I had the receipts to prove it. I stood in the foyer of my estate, my back pressed against the heavy oak door. My heart was hammering, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of execution. I had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of a Christmas party, and now, I was listening to the fallout. The silence of my home was a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind just 50 yards away. My house smelled of fresh pine and expensive beeswax candles. It smelled of peace. But I wasn't done yet. A general doesn't leave the battlefield until the enemy is fully neutralized. I walked into my security room. It was a small office off the kitchen, where I had installed a bank of monitors connected to the high-definition cameras perimetering my property. I sat down in the leather chair and watched. The scene on the monitors was pathetic and terrifying. On camera 3, which pointed directly at Tiffany's driveway, I could see the guests fleeing. They weren't leaving politely. They were practically running to their cars, eager to distance themselves from the stench of fraud and ruin. The live streamer friend was one of the first to go, phone tucked away, likely already deleting the footage to avoid being subpoenaed. Then, I saw her. Tiffany burst out of her front door. She wasn't wearing a coat, just that ridiculous gold sequin gown, shivering violently in the Chicago winter wind. She was screaming. I couldn't hear the words through the soundproof glass of my home, but her body language was primal. She was stomping toward my gate. Mom followed her, stumbling in her heels, looking like a ghost. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Mark, she's coming. She grabbed a bottle of wine and a fireplace poker. Do not open the door. I didn't need the warning. I watched on the monitor as Tiffany reached my wrought iron gate. She punched the keypad furiously. When it didn't open, she started shaking the bars. Let me in. I pressed the button for the intercom. My voice projected out to the gate, crisp and amplified. Go home, Tiffany. You're trespassing. You ruined my life, she shrieked into the speaker, her face distorted on my screen. You jealous, vindictive witch. You set me up. Open this gate. I want to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about, I replied calmly. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the fraud. And the bank will be in touch regarding the eviction. I suggest you go save your energy. Packing takes a long time. I'm going to kill you, she screamed, throwing the wine bottle against the stone pillar. It shattered, red liquid staining the limestone like blood. That was a threat. And in the state of Illinois, that was enough. I didn't call the police. I didn't have to. The neighbors, the ones who had just fled the party, had already done it. Blue and red lights washed over the snow-covered lawn. 2 squad cars pulled up. I watched, feeling a cold sense of detachment, as the officers approached Tiffany. She was hysterical, flailing, pointing at my house, screaming about how I had stolen her inheritance. Mom was trying to pull her back, sobbing, but Tiffany shoved her away. When an officer tried to calm her down, Tiffany made the mistake of shoving him. That was the end of the golden child. I watched as they handcuffed her. I watched as they put her in the back of the cruiser. I watched my mother collapse onto the snowy driveway, wailing into the night. It was a tragedy. But it was a tragedy they had written, produced, and directed. I was just the audience member who finally decided to leave the theater. Mark walked out of the house then. He was carrying a suitcase. He walked past my mother without looking at her. He walked to his car, got in, and drove away. He had made his choice. He had chosen survival. I turned off the monitors. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a glass of vintage Cabernet, a bottle I had bought to celebrate my promotion, not my sister's arrest, and sat at the island. My phone rang. It was Aunt Martha. "Did you see?" she whispered. "I saw. Your mother is calling me," Martha said. "She says she has nowhere to go. She says Mark locked the house and took the keys." "Mark owns the house too," I said. "Or rather, the bank does. But Mark is the only one with a key who isn't in handcuffs." "What do you want me to do, Jules?" "Nothing," I said. "If you pick her up, you enable her. She has a car. She has a credit card. Oh wait, no she doesn't. She has cash in her purse from the emergency fund she stole from me years ago. Let her figure it out." "That's harsh," Martha said, but there was no judgment in her voice. "It's not harsh, Martha. It's physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Tonight was the reaction." I hung up. I sat there in the silence, sipping my wine. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought the old conditioning, the voice that told me I was responsible for their happiness, would kick in. But it didn't. Instead, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from my bank app. Deposit received, $1,200. Quarterly dividend. I smiled. The world kept turning. The markets kept moving. And I was still standing. I finished my wine, went upstairs to my master bedroom, and slept for 12 hours straight. It was the first time in 10 years I hadn't dreamed of drowning. The next 90 days were a masterclass in the disintegration of a fake life. Tiffany was released on bail the next morning. Mark had refused to pay it, so Mom had to pawn her engagement ring, the last piece of real jewelry she owned, to get her out. Tiffany returned to the McMansion, but the lights were out. Literally. Mark had canceled the utilities in his name before he fled to his brother's house in Ohio. I watched from my window as Tiffany tried to spin the narrative. She went on Instagram Live, crying, using a ring light powered by a portable battery. "My sister is a monster," she told her followers. "She's a corporate shark who is trying to steal my home because she's jealous of my family. She hacked my accounts. She forged those documents to frame me." It was a bold strategy. Unfortunately for her, facts are stubborn things. My lawyer, Sarah, sent a cease and desist letter to Tiffany within the hour. We also attached the forensic report proving the metadata on the forged documents originated from Tiffany's laptop, inside Tiffany's home, on a date when I was in London for a conference. Her followers, initially sympathetic, started to turn. The internet is a cruel place, but it loves a detective story. People started digging. They found the public records of the foreclosure on Mom's house. They found the lien I held. They found the lawsuit Mark had filed for divorce, which cited financial infidelity and criminal activity. Tiffany lost her brand deals. The organic baby food company dropped her. The yoga mat company scrubbed her from their website. She was radioactive. Then came the foreclosure on the McMansion. Since the down payment had been fraudulent and the cosigner, Mom, was technically insolvent, the bank accelerated the loan. High-risk subprime corp didn't mess around. They served the eviction notice 3 weeks after Christmas. I was there the day the movers came. It wasn't a professional moving company. It was 2 guys in a beat-up van that Tiffany had hired with whatever cash she had left. I stood on my balcony, drinking my morning coffee, watching the dismantling of her ego. They dragged out the white leather sofa, stained now. They dragged out the massive flat-screen TV. They dragged out the live, laugh, love signs. Mom was there, looking frail and old. She was shouting instructions at the movers, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. Be careful with that armoire. It's vintage. It wasn't vintage. It was from Wayfair. Then, the tow truck arrived. Tiffany had stopped making payments on her Range Rover 6 months ago. The repo man didn't care about her tears. He didn't care that she was a mother of 2. He hooked up the glossy white SUV and lifted it into the air. Tiffany ran out, screaming, grabbing onto the door handle. You can't take it. I need it for the kids. Lady, let go or you're going to jail again, the driver said, bored. She let go. She collapsed on the asphalt, watching her status symbol drive away. It was brutal. It was ugly. And it was necessary. But the real battle, the one that mattered to my soul, was the one concerning the debt I had bought. The debt on my childhood home. My lawyer had proceeded with the paperwork. We had given Beverly every legal opportunity to cure the default. She couldn't. She had no income, no savings, and no assets. I received a notification that the title had officially transferred to Nemesis Holdings LLC. I owned it. I owned the house where I had been slapped. I owned the room where my money was stolen. I owned the kitchen where I was told I was worthless. I decided to visit. I drove my Porsche this time. I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in. The grass was overgrown. The shutters were hanging loose. It looked tired. I used my key, the master key of the owner, to open the door. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of stagnation. Dust, old perfume, and denial. The house was empty. Mom had moved in with Tiffany into a 2-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. They had stripped the place bare before leaving. The light fixtures were gone. The copper piping in the basement had been ripped out. Petty. Even in defeat, they were petty. I walked through the empty rooms. I walked into my old bedroom. The closet door, the one where I hid my coffee tin, was still there. I stood in the center of the room and closed my eyes. I waited for the grief to hit me. I waited for the nostalgia. But there was nothing. Just 4 walls and a floor. It wasn't a home. It was just an asset. A distressed asset that I would renovate, flip, and turn into a profit. Goodbye, I said to the empty room. I walked out, locked the door, and put the for sale sign in the yard myself. As I was getting back into my car, a sedan pulled up. It was a rusty Honda Civic. Mom got out. She looked terrible. Her hair was gray at the roots, she couldn't afford the salon anymore. Her clothes were wrinkled. She looked 20 years older than she had at the Christmas party. Juliana, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't get out of the car. I rolled down the window. Hello, Beverly. Not Mom. Beverly. I saw the sign, she said, gesturing to the for sale post. You're selling it? Your childhood home. It's a house, Beverly. And the market is hot. How can you be so cold, she wept. Tiffany and I are living in a dump. The heater doesn't work. The neighbors are loud. We have nothing. You have each other, I said. That's what you always wanted, isn't it? You and Tiffany against the world. I need money, Juliana. Just a loan. I can't live like this. I'm your mother. She reached through the window, trying to grab my hand. Her fingers felt like claws. I pulled back. I am a generous person, Beverly, I said, reaching into my glove compartment. So I am going to give you something valuable. Her eyes lit up. She thought I was reaching for my checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a pamphlet I had picked up from the Department of Human Services. This is a list of state-subsidized senior housing facilities, I said, handing it to her. And this is the number for a job placement agency. Tiffany is young. She can work. I hear Amazon is hiring. She stared at the pamphlet as if it were a poisonous snake. You expect me to live in public housing. I expect you to live within your means, I said. Something you should have taught your daughters. I learned it on my own. Now it's your turn. I curse you, she spat, throwing the pamphlet at me. I curse you, Juliana. You will die alone with your money. Maybe, I said, rolling up the window. But I will die in a warm house that I own. I drove away. I watched her in the rearview mirror, standing in the driveway of a house she no longer owned, screaming at a daughter she no longer controlled. It was the last time I ever saw her face. The winter thawed into spring. The ice on the lake melted, revealing the deep, blue water beneath. With the legal battles mostly settled, Tiffany took a plea deal for the fraud to avoid jail time, resulting in probation and restitution she would never be able to pay. My life began to quiet down. But silence can be loud. For the first few weeks, I felt a phantom limb syndrome. I was so used to the drama, the crisis management, the constant anxiety of what will they do next, that peace felt suspicious. I found myself checking my phone for abusive texts that never came. I had blocked them on everything, of course, but the reflex was there. I realized that winning the war wasn't enough. I had to rebuild the city. I started therapy. Not the nod and smile therapy, but deep, trauma-focused work. I had to unlearn 34 years of conditioning. I had to learn that my value wasn't tied to my utility. I wasn't just a wallet. I wasn't just a fixer. One afternoon, in late April, I was gardening in the backyard of the estate. I was planting hydrangeas, my favorite flower, one mom always said was too common. A car pulled into the driveway. I tensed up. But it wasn't the rusty Honda. It was a sturdy Subaru. It was Aunt Martha. And with her was my cousin, Mia, Martha's daughter, the one person in the family who had stayed neutral, terrified of the crossfire. I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands. Hey, Mia said, holding a casserole dish. Mom said you might need some lasagna. She claims you're too skinny. I looked at them. I looked for the hidden agenda. I looked for the request for money. We don't want anything, Jules, Aunt Martha said, reading my mind. She walked over and hugged me. It was a real hug. Warm, solid, demanding nothing. We just want to know you. I broke down. I stood there in my multi-million-dollar garden, crying into my aunt's shoulder. I'm sorry, I sobbed. I'm so tired. I know, Martha soothed. You've been carrying the weight of the world. Put it down, honey. It's over. We sat on the patio that afternoon. We ate lasagna. We drank lemonade. We didn't talk about Beverly or Tiffany. We talked about books. We talked about Mia's grad school applications. We talked about the best way to prune roses. It was boring. And it was the most beautiful afternoon of my life. I learned that day that family isn't blood. Blood is just biology. Family is the people who show up when you have nothing to offer but yourself. In the months that followed, I started to use my wealth differently. I stopped hoarding it like a dragon protecting gold from thieves. I started a scholarship fund for students who had been cut off by their parents for choosing their own paths, whether it was their career, their partner, or their identity. I called it the Freedom Fund, named after that coffee tin I lost when I was 16. I received letters from the recipients. Dear Juliana, thank you. My parents kicked me out because I wanted to be an artist instead of a doctor. This money bought me supplies and rent. You saved me. Dear Juliana, my mom took my tuition money for her new boyfriend. Thanks to you, I can finish my engineering degree. Each letter healed a little crack in my heart. I wasn't just the invisible child anymore. I was the architect of other people's freedom. But there was one loose end. One final confrontation I had to have. Not with them, but with myself. I went into the library of my home. I opened the safe. Inside was the black leather portfolio. The receipts. I took out the papers. The forged pay stubs. The bank statements. The foreclosure notices. I had kept them as trophies. I had kept them as proof that I wasn't crazy, that I was right. But staring at them now, I realized they were just anchors. They kept me tethered to the anger. And while anger is a great fuel to burn when you're surviving, it's a dirty fuel to run on when you're living. I walked over to the fireplace. I lit a match. I threw the papers in, one by one. I watched Tiffany's lies turn to ash. I watched Mom's betrayal curl up and disappear in smoke. I forgive you, I whispered to the flames. Not because you deserve it. But because I deserve peace. I didn't forgive them in the sense that I would let them back in. The drawbridge was up, and the moat was full of crocodiles. But I forgave the debt they owed my soul. They couldn't pay it, and I was tired of trying to collect. I watched the last ember fade. I felt lighter. I felt clear. I walked out to the balcony. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. It was breathtaking. I looked down at the house next door, Tiffany's old house. It had been sold to a nice young couple. I could see them in the backyard, playing fetch with a golden retriever. They looked happy. The curse was broken. The toxicity had been purged from the land. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Jules, it's Tiffany. I'm using a friend's phone. Please. I really need help. Mom is sick. We have nothing. Just $500. Please. I'm your sister. I looked at the text. I thought about the little girl who used to steal my toys. I thought about the woman who mocked my apartment. I thought about the fraud. Mom is sick. Was she? Or was it another ploy? Another manipulation? It didn't matter. I typed a reply. Contact the Department of Human Services at 5550199. Do not contact this number again. Then, I blocked the number. I put the phone down. I picked up my wine glass. I took a deep breath of the fresh spring air. I was Juliana. I was a survivor. I was a CEO. I was a homeowner. And finally, I was free. 1 year later. Christmas had returned. But this time, there was no anxiety. There was no knot in my stomach. There was no desperate need to prove my worth. My estate was decorated, but not with the gaudy, competitive flashiness of my mother's parties. I had simple white lights in the trees. Fresh garland on the banisters. The smell of cinnamon and cloves in the air. I was hosting. The guest list was small, curated, and genuine. Aunt Martha and Uncle Ben. Mia and her new fiancé. My lawyer, Sarah, who had become a close friend. And a few colleagues from work who respected me for my brain, not my checkbook. I stood in the kitchen, checking the roast. I was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and jeans. No power suit. No armor. Just me. Need help with that? I turned around. It was David. I hadn't mentioned David yet, had I? I met him 6 months ago at a charity auction. He was an architect, a real one, unlike the fantasy version of my father I had built in my head. He was kind. He was successful in his own right. He didn't need my money, which was the most attractive thing about him. When I told him about my family, about the fraud, about the foreclosure, he didn't judge me. He didn't tell me family is family. He just held my hand and said, "That sounds incredibly lonely. I'm glad you got out." "I've got it," I smiled at him. "But you can open the wine." The doorbell rang. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a process server. It was laughter. I opened the door to Aunt Martha and the gang. They piled in, shaking snow off their coats, handing me bottles of wine and homemade cookies. "The house looks beautiful, Jules," Mia said, looking around. "It feels warm." "It is," I said. We sat down to dinner. The table was full. The conversation was easy. There were no passive-aggressive digs. No comparisons. No gaslighting. At one point, I looked down the table. I saw the empty chair at the end. In another life, Mom would be sitting there criticizing the turkey. Tiffany would be sitting there, scrolling on her phone, ignoring everyone. I felt a brief pang of sadness for them. I heard through the grapevine, small towns talk, that they were still living in that apartment. Tiffany was working as a receptionist at a car dealership. Mom was living off Social Security, bitter and isolated, telling anyone who would listen how her ungrateful daughter abandoned her. They were stuck in their story. I had written a new one. I stood up to make a toast. "Attention, everyone," I said softly. The room went quiet. But it was a respectful silence, not a terrified one. "I just want to say thank you," I said, holding up my glass. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for being my chosen family." A year ago, I sat at a table not far from here, feeling like the smallest person in the world. Today, I feel full. To Juliana. David cheered. To freedom. Aunt Martha added. We clinked glasses. The sound was musical, not piercing. Later that night, after the guests had left and David had gone home, I sat by the fireplace. The fire was dying down, casting long shadows on the floor. I thought about you. The audience listening to this story. I know why you clicked on this video. Maybe you have a Tiffany in your life. Maybe you have a Beverly. Maybe you're the invisible child, the scapegoat, the one who works twice as hard for half the love. Maybe you're sitting in your car right now, dreading going into a family gathering. Maybe you're looking at your bank account, wondering if you can buy their approval this year. Don't. Take it from the woman who bought the estate next door, you cannot buy what they are incapable of giving. The most expensive thing you will ever own is your peace of mind. And sometimes, the price of that peace is walking away. It's scary. It's lonely at first. They will call you selfish. They will call you cruel. They will try to destroy your reputation because they can no longer destroy your spirit. Let them. Build your fortress. Secure your assets. Keep your receipts. But most importantly, save yourself. Because the best revenge isn't foreclosure. It isn't humiliating them at a party. It isn't even seeing them fail. The best revenge is being happy. Truly, deeply, boringly happy without them. I walked to the window one last time. The snow was falling, covering the tracks in the driveway, covering the scars on the land. The house next door, the one Tiffany used to own, was dark. The new owners were asleep. My house was warm. My conscience was clear. I turned off the lights, not because I was hiding, but because I was ready to rest. Thank you for listening to my story. I am truly grateful for you. If you made it to the very end, you are the kind of person who understands the value of resilience. Comment the letter A below so I know you are one of the few who stand apart from the crowd. If this story resonated with you, if you felt that fire in your belly, write down your feelings in the comments. Share your story. And please, click on the next video on the channel to hear more stories of truth and triumph. You are not alone. Good night.